is support your sheriff. You're going to just be so knowledgeable. Okay, so Pastor David Whitney did an awesome job. Since I teach the course, I kind of took out my little portion from the Constitution course I teach regarding interposition, because I can, reiterate and add to what he had to say. But also, I wanted to take this opportunity to focus on some real-life examples of a constitutional sheriff in action. So we saw one today. We got to meet Sheriff Richard Mack, and he's definitely an example of a constitutional sheriff. Of course, we learned today that he took on the Supreme Court. He sued the Clinton administration and won his case with the Supreme Court in 1994. Well, he took the case started in 94. I think it was 96 when they actually ended up successful with that. Okay, so that was Sheriff Mack. He's definitely a real-life example of a constitutional sheriff. Let's look at the definition, according to Black's Law Dictionary, of interposition. So interposition described as the action of a state or local law enforcement official, like a sheriff, while exercising its sovereignty in rejecting a federal mandate that it believes is unconstitutional or overreaching. I can make this bigger. There we go.
Oh, we can't
Yeah,
see
we
it
can.
right now.
Oh,
Yeah, we don't have it there, Jack.
shoot. All right, I will switch mine.
Oh, we can hear you too, so.
Besides, you guys are probably getting ahead of me. I put it up on, I let you guys cheat. I put it up on the screen.
I've got to stand a little.
Maybe it's 3.
Maybe it's two. Maybe it's one.
I think you're not.
Behind door.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, so we're talking about the definition of interposition. So simply put, this means a local government official, like a sheriff, protecting the citizens of his county from an overreaching state or federal government official that is overstepping their jurisdictional boundaries. The sheriff interposes, he puts himself in between the citizen and the state or federal government that is acting outside their legal authority. And he uses the protection of the U.S. Constitution. So I'm going to talk about now an article that is titled "A Constitutional Sheriff in Action," and it gives an example of this principle, and it's a true life story of what interposition looks like. This article demonstrates the power of the sheriff who knows his constitution and his constitutional duties to his local citizens. So here it is, a constitutional sheriff in action. This is about an Elkhart County sheriff who intervenes against the feds in a raw milk case. The county sheriff is the only elected law enforcement position in the nation. It would seem that one of the best ways to get elected to county sheriff these days is to campaign against the encroachments by the federal government on basic rights guaranteed by the Constitution. Sheriff Brad Rogers is a member of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association and was recently afforded an opportunity to act on that promise. In 2011, Sheriff Rogers of Elkhart County, Indiana, stood up for one of his constituents, raw dairy farmer David Hochstetler, who was being subpoenaed to appear before a federal grand jury in Detroit, exploring felony charges in connection with his distribution of raw milk. Hochstetler had undergone repeated inspections by federal regulators, culminating in the subpoena. His situation prompted Elkhart County Sheriff Brad Rogers to intervene, telling Hochstetler, "I will protect you in Elkhart County. I can't protect you in Detroit. Are you ready for some sparks to fly?" And he replied that he was. So, and by the way, the sheriff didn't just hear about this and then step in. He invited this Hochstetler guy invited the sheriff to come out to his dairy farm, and he sat down and he petitioned the sheriff for help on his behalf. And the sheriff, when interviewed, he said, "I think I drank some raw milk that day sitting at that table." So Sheriff Rogers advised the feds to watch their step or face arrest by his department, stating the continuous inspections of Hochstetler's constituted harassment and were unreasonable. Rogers emailed the Justice Department trial attorney. "This is notice that if there are any further attempts to inspect this farm without a search warrant signed by a trial judge, I will have you removed or arrested for trespassing." So the response from the Justice Department declared that the federal government had precedence based on the Supremacy Clause. We heard about that today. Rogers responded back by telling him the federal government is supreme if the issue at hand has to do with the Constitution. Remember, the Supremacy Clause only works if it's pursuant to the Constitution. So there is no mention of raw milk or other products or production in the Constitution. This exchange happened on a Friday. On Tuesday, Mr. Hochstetler received a certified letter from the Department of Justice saying they had withdrawn their subpoena. The U.S. Department of Justice attorney had no reply when interviewed regarding this exchange. This story is about much more than just raw milk. It's about the role of the federal government in the affairs of the states. Sheriffs take an oath to uphold the Constitution, not to enforce arbitrary, unconstitutional mandates or inspections by federal regulators or bureaucrats. It's about the federal government trampling on individual rights. The arrogance of thinking federal law trumps everything flies in the face of the 10th Amendment, Rogers says. If we think the federal government trumps everything, we're destined for trouble in the freedoms here in our country.
You're here?
Yes. So Sheriff Rogers was exactly right about the Supremacy Clause, and that this federal official was basically bluffing to see if he could play the Constitution card to make the sheriff back off. He didn't know that Sheriff Rogers knew his Constitution. So the issue at hand had nothing to do with the Supremacy Clause. Because Rogers knew his Constitution, he did not back off. Further, Sheriff Rogers could have used any other sections of the Constitution listed in the article you saw highlighted in red to successfully interpose for this dairy farmer. So we're going to go just a brief overview on the Constitution. We're going to look at Article 1. And you have a little pocket Constitution now, and you should get familiar with that. And the first 3 articles in that Constitution go over the authorities given to the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of the government. And Article 1 is going to tell us about the legislative branch. And it begins that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. Now, Sheriff Richard Mack told you, he looked up that word all, and guess what? He found out it meant all, everything.
Did he ask Bill Clinton?
No, that's his, sorry.
So the most important word in that whole sentence is the very first little 3-letter word that says all. Means there's no lawmaking power left over for anybody else. It's all vested in our Congress. So our legislative powers are the lawmaking powers of our government, and they all reside with the Congress. Now in Article 1, Section 8, that's the section that contains all those enumerated powers that we delegated. Because remember, the powers belong to the state. We didn't surrender them. We delegated them to the federal government. And there's about 18 of them. And in some documents, you can see they're numbered. In the pocket Constitution you have, they're just separate sentences. But if you break them down, it comes out to about 18 delegated powers that the states delegated to the federal government. So if we look at the Clause 18, the very last enumerated power, it says to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. Key word in that sentence is foregoing. So what does foregoing mean? It means all the first 17 that we just listed. So the 18th clause is telling us you have the lawmaking power, but to make all laws that shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. So if they don't have anything to do with those first 17 powers that we've delegated to you, they're not your business. That's not your jurisdiction. You have no right to operate in that realm.
Kind of miss that, don't they?
They do. They miss that point. So we have to remind them. That's why we're here, to keep it in the forefront of our minds so we know. Okay. So another important thing to know about your Constitution is Amendments 9 and 10. We're always so focused on our first and second, which are very important, and we should all remember those. But the 9th and 10th are very significant, and they actually limit the authority of the federal government. So the 9th Amendment says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Now, I believe it was Sheriff Mack who was explaining that there wasn't originally a Bill of Rights. That was an idea somebody dreamed up saying, you know, we better point it out because they're kind of dense and they may not really get it. So let's point out to them what we see our rights as being. Well, Alexander Hamilton brought up a very valid point. He says, well, if you make up a list, there, and if we, you know, forget one and you know, later on down the line, it's like, oh man, we forgot to say that, then the federal government's going to assume it must be theirs. We didn't list it as one of our rights, so they're going to take ownership of it. So this whole 9th Amendment was in response to that concern, that very valid concern, and it tells them that although we've enumerated all these rights, that does not deny or disparage others retained by the people. So again, the Bill of Rights, it doesn't give us the rights. They're already rights that we retain, and the ones that are not mentioned in the Bill of Rights, they're still retained by us. The Second Amendment. Does the Second Amendment give us the right to keep and bear arms? No, very smart. It says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, because that's a very important unalienable right. We have the right to self-preservation. We have the right to defend ourselves. So the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The government does not give us that right. It is ours. We are created with it. Amendment 10, the powers. So first they're saying the rights. They're saying these are our rights, but that's not all of them, so don't think that you're going to hold us to just this list. Now they're going to talk about the powers, because the Constitution is a document of limited powers that were delegated. But we want to let them know that the power is not delegated to the United States or to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states. Well, they're reserved to the states and the people. So again, they didn't want the federal government saying, oh, well, they forgot to mention that. Oh, that's ours then. We're going to take ownership of that. They forgot to mention, they left that out, so that's ours. We're going to take care of that. Don't worry, we got you. 10th Amendment says no. If it's not in there, it belongs to the states, and don't you go touching it. Of course, we let them, don't we?
All over them.
All, yes. Too often. So, according to these amendments, did the federal government have any authority to inspect that man's farm or interfere with his business in any way?
Absolutely.
Absolutely not. So Sheriff Rogers was very correct in his intervening and interposing on behalf of that citizen who called out for his help against those federal tyrants. So according to these amendments, where do the vast majorities of powers reside?
The people.
With the people, that's right, we the people. We delegate them these few things, but everything else we keep. It's ours. So with the people in the states, the federal government's powers are listed and limited. All others are reserved for the states and individuals. That's 10th Amendment. Do you see the principles embodied here of who's in charge?
Yes.
Yes. We the people are in charge. Do you see how we have been led to believe the exact opposite? That the federal government has all the power. Yeah, it's completely upside down. You know, they think the big bad federal government up here is over and above everything else, and it's completely opposite. We the people down here have all the power, and we tell the federal government what they can do and what they're limited to do, and they're not supposed to get out of that box.
That's what they call operating in color of law.
It's also, there's a term called usurpation, and the federal government is usurping authority that they don't have.
That's right.
And we need to get that back. And that's what we're doing here in this room. And that's what I do. A big part of what I do is I teach people what's in their Constitution so that they know and they can better defend what the next time they're talking to a legislator, they can maybe put them in their place, and maybe we'll get back to where we're supposed to be. So I talked about, so one of the remedies we talked about was interposition. And there's another remedy, Chris Ann Hall, she's funny. So I had a couple options of how to deliver the information about explaining what nullification is. And there's another gentleman named Thomas Woods, and if you look him up on YouTube, there's numerous amounts of videos, and he's very entertaining as well. He's a very good presenter, he keeps it lively. I would imagine if you saw him in person, you would be very engaged and enthralled in what he has to say. But I love Chris Ann Hall and how she presents things, and I took an excerpt out of one of her speeches. I would love to listen to the whole thing, but I just took the portion out, and it was really hard to find where to start and stop, because everything she has to say is very important and significant. But I'm going to let her explain the concept of nullification, and you know what? Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys take a short break, because her video is about 45 minutes, and that's going to wrap up what we're doing here. So let's take a break, and then we'll get into nullification.
That are delegated to the federal government and where they're supposed to be. He says the powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined. Those that remain in the states are numerous and indefinite. Now I want you, I don't know if anybody's taking notes or mental notes. There is a very, very important word in that second bullet. Very, very important. You know what it is? Remain. If something is to remain, what does that mean? It means it started off there, right? So when you are delegating powers, as the 10th Amendment declares, powers delegated to the United States, there are two parties in that action, right? You have the delegator and the delegate. And so important in understanding who holds the power is understanding which party is the delegator and which is the delegate, right? The power is delegated by the proposed Constitution to who? The federal government. Those which are to remain states. So what does that tell you? That means all the power came from the states, right? Because the power that was delegated left the states and everything else remains. The powers with those which are to remain in the states, state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former, meaning the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government, will be exercised principally on external objects. That was Madison's way of saying foreign affairs. And then he tells us what the federal government's power is. War, peace, negotiation, foreign commerce. The only power delegated to our central government via the Constitution were powers that pertain to foreign affairs, specifically war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. Every other power that exists in government was supposed to remain in the states. How many of our states, how many people in our union understand that the only thing our federal government is authorized to do is communicate with foreign governments? That have no power within the states unless it has to do with foreign treaties that are constitutionally made. Madison continues, makes his point. The power is reserved to the several states. What does that word reserved mean? Nobody, and that chair says reserved for Chris Ann Hall. Anybody else sit in it? No. It means it is for me and me alone. And these powers are reserved to the several states, and they extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, properties of the people, the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the states. Now, the federal government has been delegated the power to war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, and everything else remains in the states. Are there powers floating around in the ether somewhere? No, it's either the power, war, peace, negotiation, foreign commerce, or everything else. So let me ask you, is healthcare, war, peace, negotiation, or foreign commerce? Is education, war, peace, negotiation, or foreign commerce?
No.
Is the Department of Interior? The Bureau of Land Management?
No.
Okay, here's a tricky one. Is the Department of Homeland Security? No, the very word homeland tells you they don't belong here. Because homeland ain't foreign. So, if the federal government is doing more than war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, where does that power come from? If the federal government uses powers outside of the Constitution, it has to steal that power from where? The states. Let me ask you something. If I stole your car Would I have the legal authority to use it?
No.
Would I have the legal authority to allow someone else to use it? But if you allow me to drive around in your car for months without saying anything, the legal authority doesn't change. But now there's an apparent authority, right? Because everybody sees me driving around. Now, legal authority and apparent authority are not the same thing, because the legal authority does not change. The car is still stolen. It still belongs to you. But everybody then assumes that it belongs to me because I'm the one driving around in it. So do you have to sue me to get your car back? No. You have to provide proof of your ownership, the title deed. And once you show proof of ownership, that car comes back to you without a lawsuit. Now, if I had actually stolen and then sold your car, the poor sap that bought the stolen car would have to sue or get a compensation for the money lost. But you get your car back without any questions. So we're stealing power from the states. Does the federal government have the legal authority to use that power? No. But if we allow them to wield that power without any opposition, don't we then create an apparent authority? Do we have to sue the federal government to get our power back?
No.
No, we do not. What do we have to do? We have to show proof of ownership. What is the proof of ownership for the state's power? The Constitution. You see, suing the federal government actually increases the power of the federal government. It does. Because you're going to sue the federal government in federal court, right? Which means you are telling that court, you have the authority to rule in our favor and to rule against us because you are more powerful than we are. And so by suing the government in their court system, the federal government in their court system, you're actually giving them more power. Because when they rule against you, then you have to submit, right? What do you do if you threw the authority in their court to begin with? You recognize their authority. So what's the solution? Here's the solution. The doctrine which denies the states the right of protecting their reserved powers, remember reserved, belongs to them alone, which would vest in the general government, it matters not for which department, the right of determining exclusively and finally the powers delegated to it is incompatible with the sovereignty of the states and of the Constitution itself. Considered as the basis for the federal union. What does that mean? It means if the federal government can decide the limitations of its own power, and we declare that the states have no power to hold the government to its limitations, then the states are not sovereign, right? Because the federal government has more power than they do, and to tell them what they can and cannot do. And if the states are not sovereign, can they have engaged in the contract that created the Constitution? No, because they're not sovereign. And so if the states are not sovereign, then the Constitution does not legally exist. And by declaring that the federal government has the right to determine its own power, you have determined that the states are not sovereign, that the Constitution does not exist, the central government does not exist via the Constitution, and that it exists based on its own existence and its own will. Now, the parenthetical in this paragraph is probably one of the most important things to understand. It matters not through which department. How many branches of government do we have on paper? 3. No, on paper. And 3. I said that very carefully. I try to speak carefully like a very much did. We have 3, right? The executive, legislative, and judicial. So before we move on, can we all unanimously agree that the judicial department is part of the federal government? Okay. So he's saying it doesn't matter whether it's Congress, the executive branch, or the judicial branch. If decide what the power that belongs to the federal government is. You have declared the states are no longer sovereign because now the federal government rules and reigns over them, and then the Constitution cannot legally exist. It gets easier to understand. Jefferson says, whenever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and have no force. Do I have any educators in the room? All right, for my educators, have you ever had a moment where you were teaching something and then all of a sudden a light bulb went off and you taught yourself? Because sometimes we teach and the things seem obvious, but then all of a sudden it smacks us right in the face, and we think, it's even easier than I thought. Why did I think that? And that happened to me the other day, actually, in understanding what Jefferson was saying, and then understanding the difference between legal authority and assumed authority. Okay? Here's how this works. Jefferson says, whenever a general government assumes undelegated power, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. So if I steal your car, does any act that I do with your car have any legal force at all? No, absolutely not. Do I have to stand up and declare your acts I have no force? No, I don't, because the act of you stealing my car created the reality that your future acts have no force. I don't have to declare it, it just simply is, because you stole my car. So how does that work? Madison says, in the case of deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of powers, other powers not granted, the states have the right, and this is even bigger, are duty bound to interpose. Do you understand there's a difference between a right and a duty? A duty is greater than a right. A right is something that you have naturally. It's a very passive thing. You don't have to do anything to obtain it. A duty takes activity, something that requires your actions. And he says, not only do the states have an inherent right to stand between the federal government and the rights and liberties of the people, they have a duty to do so. Why? Because in July 2nd, 1776, we delegated all this power to them and said, through this power, you will preserve our liberty. And they said, fine, we will take that responsibility, but we have to form a union. We're going to delegate a certain portion of our power to the central government, which made them supervisors over the central government. Right? If you delegate authority to an employee, are you not the supervisor over that employee? Didn't we establish that the power delegated to the central government came from the state? Which means that the central government are the employees of the states. And if the employers are not governing over their employees to make sure they're not stealing stuff, then the employers are the negligent ones, right? And that's why the states have the duty to keep the federal government in its limits and authorities to preserve our rights and our liberties. How do we do that? Jefferson said, the several states who formed the Constitution, I'm going to have to change that back because I teach this differently now. He actually says the several states who formed the Federal Compact. You know what that is, right? The Constitution. The several states who formed the Constitution, being sovereign and independent in 1799. Look there, we're still sovereign and independent in 1799. Having the unquestionable right to judgments and fractions, and that a nullification by those sovereignties, who are the sovereignties? Of all unauthorized acts done under the color of law, the color of that instrument is the right way. Now here's the distinction that came to my mind. If the federal government is doing more than war, peace negotiation, and foreign commerce, it is stealing power from the states, right? Which means it has no legal authority to use that power. We talk about nullification. We talk about nullification as if it's something that the states have to do. a stolen authority and illegal authority to become an apparent authority. Because if we don't stand up and point out that these acts have no force, then all of a sudden, their apparent authority keeps going. It never becomes legal, it just remains apparent because we don't challenge it. Now, nullification. You realize, and I know as we start, we are now 1 hour into this presentation, and this is the first time you've heard this word nullification. That is on purpose. Because there are people who do not understand the Constitution, do not understand sovereignty, do not understand nullification, the principle of stolen in mind, that turn nullification into a dirty, nasty word. You see, nobody told me this. I'm warning you. So you don't have to suffer the way I do. Everything that I teach you comes because I read original documents. I do not read other people's books. I do that on purpose because as a linguist, I was trained that the only reliable source is an original source. Anything beyond an original source loses credibility. So I do not read other people's books. I stumbled upon nullification all on my own. I didn't invent it. Other people have written books about it, but I didn't know because I only read original source documents. And so I stumbled across this, and I got really excited. Because you see, this is a right now solution. We don't need any future legislation. We don't need any future actions. These laws are already null and void. The states just must simply step up and declare the obvious and remove the apparent authority.
Yep.
It's simple. It's right now. It's easy. Just do it. And so I thought, this is awesome. Why aren't we doing this? Why doesn't everybody know about this? So I trucked myself up to my state capital, Tallahassee, Florida, and I presented myself at a Senate judicial hearing on the establishment of the Obamacare exchanges. And I was lucky enough to have a whole bunch of patriots that run. It was a huge packed out meeting, and when everybody saw that I was there, everybody signed up to speak at the meeting because you only get 3 minutes, and then when they were called, they all waived their right to their time to meet.
Yeah.
So it gives her more time.
It didn't set up that way, it just happened that way. Much to the chagrin of our Senate judicial committee. Yeah, you can watch it on YouTube actually, because it is very interesting. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but it is very interesting because I'm going to tell you right now, it didn't go over well. Because they realized I'm still talking.
She's a lawyer.
And the committee chairman starts banging his gavel, says, Ms. Hall, you've got to wrap it up. I said, no, I don't. He said, you should do your time's up. I said, no. And you can see on the video, I said, all these people have waived their time for me. I'm going to literally have a minimum of 45 minutes. Now, I'm not going to take 45 minutes, but he says, this is a crowded room and a lot of people want to talk. I said, that's fine, but I'm still allotted the time that I get. Isn't that how Robert's rules go?
Exactly.
And so I'm not stopping. And I keep going, and he starts fidgeting in his seat, and it's all fine. No, I'm almost done, don't worry. I'm not going to use my whole 45 minutes. And then I sit down. And another senator looks at me in the audience and says, I don't know how Ms. Hall can defend the Constitution of the United States. After all, it made people like me 3/5 of a person. Now, I know that's a total flat-out lie. The 3/5 clause did not make black people 3/5 of a person. It didn't even make slaves 3/5 of a person. That's just a mutation of history in order to alter the construction of the Constitution. And then he said this to me. He said, and after all, Ms. Hall, the Constitution denies you your right to vote. And that's a lie too, because the Constitution never prohibited women from voting. Women had the right to vote in this country until 1807, They even had the same property ownership rights as men until 1807, when corrupt politicians started monkeying with who could vote and who couldn't vote on the state level, so all their friends could get to the ballot box and all their friends and all their enemies couldn't go at all. The 19th Amendment does not grant women the right to vote. Go read it. It just takes a simple reading. It says they have that right and it can't be taken away. And at this point in time, I lose all control of my faculties. Everything that is sitting on my lap, all my notes, my phone, my purse, everything is now laying on the floor because I have stood straight up in my chair and I put it in and I say, that is a lie and you are a liar. The entire gallery is now on their feet because they see the guards coming at me. Now I'm catching, I don't know, I get in these situations, I get television, so there's nobody in the room but me and this guy, right? And I start catching and I notice out the corner of my eye, my husband is starting to get a little bit nervous because he's trying to figure out what is he going to do? Is he going to try to get between all these people and stop a riot, or is he going to stand between me and the guards and stop them from hauling me away? Now, under Robert's rules, I didn't actually follow procedure the way I was supposed to. Under Robert's rules, because he called me out, I had the authority to stand up and dispute his claim. Yes. But I didn't, because I just lost it. And the chairman's banging his gavel, Miss Hall, you're an attorney. You know the proper rules of the court. I said, well, in that case, sir, I object. Now, the Senate President, his name is Don Gates, he comes into the room after the meeting is over. He's not there. He has no idea what has transpired. And a friend of mine says, hey, Chrisanne, I want to introduce you to the Senate President. Insert maniacal laugh. Because he knows what's about to happen. I have no idea. I'm totally green here, okay? I have no idea what's going on. Now, Don Gates is the Senate President, and he is a self-proclaimed conservative Republican. And so I go to Mr. Gates, and I say to Mr. Gates, I introduce myself, and I'm saying, Mr. Gates, it's a real pleasure to meet you. Oh, yes, Ms. Hall, it's a pleasure to meet you as well. I said, well, that's great, Mr. Gates, because I would love to see more of you. Oh, Ms. Hall, that'd be fantastic. I said, really, Mr. Gates? Because I'd like to set up an appointment to come and address the Senate on, yes, I said it, nullification. Because nobody warned me, it was a dirty word. He steps back, like I have just spit in his eye. Puts his hand on his hip and says, nullification, huh? I guess the Supreme Court didn't get your memo. I'm like, my first thought was, who's he think he is talking to me like this? Because I'm still under the understanding that he's my employee, right? I'm totally naive. I said, my memo? I guess they didn't get Hamilton, Madison, or Jefferson's memo either then, did they? He says, Madison, huh? Talked to Madison lately? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I have. It's called the Federalist Papers. Maybe you want to read them every now and again. At which point he realizes, I think, that I'm not who he's used to dealing with. I'm not going to back down. So he turns his back, starts waving his hand, mumbling things about dead people in irrelevant papers. Now he gets about as far away from me as the pretty lady will see. He's walking out the door. I'm stunned by what has just transpired. And so I shout at him, hey, Mr. Gates, I thought you said you were a conservative Republican. He spun on his heels and pointed his finger at me and said, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I said, well, maybe you better learn something about that document, don't you think? At which point Mr. Gates realizes something that I don't. Because remember, I have television. There's a whole crowd of people behind me, some of the press. His entire demeanor changes. Oh, Miss Hall, I'd be happy to read anything that you'd send to me. Just send me an email. So I did. A little primer on nullification. You can read all this stuff. It's all on my website. Because he replies to my email shot or hanged. That I should be shot or hanged for asserting that the states have sovereignty over the federal government. What do you think would have happened if I had told Don Gates he would be shot or hanged? Well, he was confronted by the Huffington Post, and he laughed it off. Oh, of course, I didn't mean that we should be shooting or hanging people. I just wanted Miss Hall to realize that we could disagree and still remain civil.
Disagree and still remain civil.
So apparently the idea of my conservative Republican Senate president shooting and hanging people is civil. So remember that. The next time you get in trouble, you're just being civil. See, we have been infested on both sides of the fence with federal supremacists. People who believe that the federal government is supreme over the states and that the states are nothing more than colonies of the federal government. They'll use these arguments. It's not in the Constitution. The Supreme Court said no, and the Supremacy Clause prohibits it. But the people who live this said to disallow nullification would be an act of tyranny. Because you're taking the power away from the states to defend their reserved powers. So we'll address this first one. It's not in the Constitution because it is in the Constitution. It's the 9th and 10th Amendments. But we have to understand what the 9th Amendment really means and its purpose for being there. The 9th and 10th Amendments are the most important clauses in the entire Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The 9th Amendment specifically is the most important clause of everything in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights because it is the 9th Amendment that makes us a republic and not a kingdom. It's the 9th Amendment that declares all the rights in the universe belong to the people whether they're written down or not. That's what it says. That was its purpose. Hamilton said that if we make a Bill of Rights, the federal government will use it against us. He says they'll come up with the argument that it's not on the list, and since it's not on the list, you must have meant for us to regulate it. And Hamilton said, if you say that the freedom of press shall not be abridged, then they'll try to define press to regulate it. He said, how can you define a liberty without opening the greatest latitude for regulating it? And so we inserted the 9th Amendment to make it clear that the federal government did not have the authority to do anything to our rights because, as the 10th Amendment declares, only power is delegated to the federal government in a limited and defined form. Remember, John Adams wrote in 72, the natural rights of the colonists are these: first, life; second, liberty; third, property; together, number 4, with the right to protect and defend them with the best means possible. Because you see, when you're in a republic, the best means possible to denying and protecting your life, your liberty, and your property from a federal government who wants to steal it is declaring their actions null and void. Because we're not a kingdom. In a kingdom, the only way to protect your life, your liberty, and your property is rebellion and chopping off kings' heads. We're not a kingdom, so we have other means to protecting our life, our liberty, our property, and sovereignty and nullification is essential to that protection. And it's secured in the 9th Amendment and the 10th Amendment. So it's right there. I mean, you can't argue with it. Not only that, have you ever noticed that the 9th and 10th Amendments are different from the first 8? The first 8 enumerate rights, right? 9 and 10 do not. Remember, this is a contract. And by contract law, every contract has a clause or clauses called rules of construction. A rule of construction clause within a contract tells future appliers or readers or interpreters of that contract the rules by which you must apply all clauses. 9 and 10 are the contractual rules of construction for our contract, which says, rule number 1, whenever you are interpreting any part at all of this Constitutional Bill of Rights, you must remember, first and foremost, all the rights in the universe belong to the people. interpreting Article 1, Section 7, Article 2, Section 3, Article 4, Section 1, whatever. Every interpretation must remember all rights of the universe belong to the people. Rule of construction number 2, only power is delegated to government in a limited and defined form. And once you understand that, the rest of the Constitution is easy to understand when you apply the rules. So it is in the Constitution, it's in the 9th and 10th Amendments. The next one is interesting. SCOTUS, that's what we call Supreme Court, Supreme Court of the United States. SCOTUS has the final say. James Madison disagrees. In the best quote I have ever seen, the best document I've ever seen that points out the ridiculous nature of this argument that the Supreme Court said so. Read this. If the decisions of the judiciary be raised above the authority of the sovereign parties to the Constitution. Who are the sovereign parties to the Constitution? If the judiciary be raised above the authority of the states, dangerous powers not delegated may not only be usurped and executed by other departments, but that the judicial department also may exercise or sanction, because healthcare is constitutional, right? Dangerous powers beyond the grant of the Constitution. Consequently, that the ultimate right of the parties to the Constitution, who are the parties to the Constitution? States. The ultimate right of the states to judge whether the compact, which is what? The Constitution. Whether the Constitution has been dangerously violated, must extend to violations by one delegated authority as well as by another. By the judiciary as well as by the executive or legislative. Can you get any clearer than that? If the Supreme Court can tell the federal government the limitation of its powers, then the Supreme Court, being the federal government, limits the federal government.
Yep.
But you see, this is another one of those moments where the obvious pointed out to me, came to me here, by one delegated authority as well as by the other. Did we not establish that power was delegated to the federal government? Yes? Did we not establish that the power that was delegated to the federal government came from the states?
Yes.
That means the only power the executive branch has is power that's been delegated by the states, right? The only power the legislative branch has been delegated by the states, right? The only power the judicial branch has is power that's been delegated by the states. And when the states are delegating the power, that means it's their power to begin with, and they're the ones that hold the ultimate authority, correct? The Supremacy Clause prohibits it. I love this argument. This is the best one, really. Because when your politician or your nullifying naysayer says the Supremacy Clause says that the states can't nullify federal law, he has just declared himself illiterate. Because it literally takes a 6th grade reading education to understand the grammar in the Supremacy Clause and to know that that's not how it reads. But let's check with Alexander Hamilton first and see how this works. Alexander Hamilton tells us in Federalist Paper 78, no legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. Does it get any simpler than that?
No.
Why? Now, Hamilton does what our framers often do. They tell us how it's supposed to work, and then they tell us what will happen if we don't work it the way it's supposed to. So no legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. He said to deny this, to allow legislative acts contrary to the Constitution to be valid, would be to affirm that the deputy is greater than his principal and the servant is above his master. I want you to catch that now. Because what Hamilton is telling you is that the federal government is the deputy to the states. And that the federal government is the servant to the master states. But then he continues and says, and then the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves. Now you know why, when you write your congressman or your senator, you get the same boilerplate response that everybody else gets. You try to meet with your senator us. Why? Because we are the Constitution. We are the life, we are the breath, we are the body of the Constitution. And when they declare themselves superior to the Constitution, they can do whatever they want, they declare themselves superior to us. And then he says, but may do not only what their powers do not authorize, but also what they forbid. Enter in the Affordable Care Act. Is health care more peace negotiation or foreign commerce?
No.
No. So that falls into the category of not authorized, right? But the Health Care Act has provisions in it that violate your First, Fourth, Second Amendments, and Fifth Amendment, Seventh Amendment, keep thinking, Eighth Amendment. And now we've slipped into what they are forbidden to do. Why? Because we allowed legislative acts contrary to the Constitution to be valid. The Supremacy Clause says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land. Not every legislative act is the supreme law of the land. Only those legislative acts which are made in pursuance to the Constitution. Because you see, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, right? But if we allow legislative acts to be the supreme law of the land unqualified, then how can the Constitution be the supreme law of the land? Because if legislative acts are supreme, independent of their constitutionality, then guess what? Legislative acts are the supreme law of the land, and the Constitution is underneath that. And we've declared the federal government superior to the very law that created them. And what happens when the creation becomes superior to the creator? Mary Shelley wrote a book about it. She called it an abomination. Frankenstein, remember? We have a Frankenstein federal government. Is that complicated? Made in pursuance thereof? I don't even know how you can formulate that argument. You know how I think you can formulate that argument? These people have never read the Supremacy Clause themselves. They're just repeating what some ignorant professor or some judge or some armchair lawyer told them. Because they never read it themselves. It's just too easy. I can't believe that we're that ignorant. And that's exactly what Hamilton said, right? No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. If it's not made in pursuance thereof, it cannot be the supreme law of the land. Here's the last warning from the people of the legislators of Virginia of 1799. The acquiescence of the states under infractions of the federal compact, which is the compact, what is it? The Constitution. So in acquiescence of the states under the infractions of the federal compact, if we just simply go along with the federal government stealing our power, we either get a speedy consolidation by precipitating the state governments into impotency and contempt. If the states do not have the authority to defend their own reserved power, let me ask you something. Why do we have states? What is their purpose? Because if they are just subjects to the federal government, then that's all they are. They're just clearinghouses for federal money and federal regulation. And if your state representative tells you that nullification is not allowed by the states, then you should look at him and say, then why do we pay you? Why don't we just dissolve the state government, declare ourselves all subjects to the laws of the federal government, and submit, lay down prostrate before the king, and accept our bonds and chains? Because if the states don't have the authority to defend their reserved powers, then they have no purpose for existing, except for sucking up our money and rent. But what happens when the states no longer exist? nothing but subjects. And what is the only option when you don't like your king? Rebellion and cutting off his head. And here that's what they tell us. If the states do not stand against the federal government's theft of our power, they will prepare the way for a revolution by a repetition of these infractions until the people are aroused to appear in the majesty of their strength. Jefferson said there will always come the end of the long trend of abuses. And when the states fail to operate as the constitutional republic that we are, they transform us into a kingdom and leave our only option to be revolution. Which means when the federal government fails to do its job, the states must defend the republic. Because the acquiescence of the states to stolen federal power means we are no longer a republic. We are a kingdom. But if your states refuse, guess who's supposed to step up? Your sheriff, your county commission, your city council, your school boards are supposed to be the ones that stand in interposition. But how can they if we don't ensure that they know what their job is? We keep electing people based on their party affiliation. We don't actually research people based on their understanding of the Constitution and their morality.
Amen.
Because morality matters.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Let's stop it right there because, yeah, continue on. But you get the message, and the importance of that is knowing, now that you know where the majority of the power resides, you know, at the lower levels, well, technically we're not the lower levels, we the people hold all the power, and our local elected public servants are probably even more important than the president, the senators, Congress, because really all the power is held locally. And so this is why we're doing this. This is why it's so important for our sheriffs to be here today. Because we've come to a time where both our counties, actually the Tri-County area, Nevada County, Yuba County, Sutter County, all of our sheriffs are retiring this year after years, many, many years in office. And so we have this opportunity, a new sheriff, there's going to be a new sheriff in town. And this is our opportunity to make sure that we have a constitutional sheriff that understands his authority and where he needs to act within that authority. So I'm going to make an announcement before I forget, because I don't want to forget. So as you know, we have two of our sheriff candidates here, and as a reward for being here, because we do so much appreciate them being here, there is a new, going to be a new radio show starting April 1st. It's called Yuba Sutter Political Spotlight. They have a Facebook page currently. You can go to that Facebook page and get all the inside scoops on the goings-on of political happenings in Yuba Sutter area. And so this radio show is going to be every Sunday, pretty much during the campaign season. So beginning at April 1st, definitely through the campaign, maybe beyond, who knows. But the Political Spotlight wants to give a commercial spot to each one of the candidates for the duration of the campaign season. So both of you took the time to be here today. You would need to get in touch with me so we can get that arranged, and we'll give you like a 60-second commercial. So each of you will have one. The commercial will run every Sunday during the Yuba Sutter Political Spotlight radio show. It's on 1410 KMYC. It's from 1 to 3. So every Sunday you guys will get some free advertisements. So how's that? So we really appreciate you guys taking the time to be here, and it means a lot to us that you saw the importance and the significance of this class, so we do appreciate it. So just a couple closing comments to reiterate. The whole purpose of the class was kind of open up, take a peek, open up that this crookedy document here that nobody seems to know, and just take a little peek inside and get some tidbits out of it. We touched on it today. There's a lot more to learn. There's a 12-week course that I teach that will get more in depth, but our sheriffs, along with all the other elected public servants, take an oath when they take office. and they take an oath to protect and defend this document. And I think it's become something that's taken rather lightly, and people have become so complacent, and it's very unceremonial, and they show up probably at the city clerk or the county clerk, I can imagine, and they raise their right hand, and they recite these words that maybe don't have a lot of significance. It's what happens when something you do repetitively over, you know, like when I was growing up, for instance, you say grace before dinner. Well, it was the same thing over and over again, so it loses its meaning. So now, you know, of course, we pray differently, and so when you pray from your heart, you know, you feel it from your heart. So it means more to you. The significance sinks in. So understanding this before you take your oath is important. We want you to, you know what you're taking an oath to uphold and defend. So an example of that is, you know, we stand up here, we say our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. Okay, I can guarantee if you walk out the door and ask 10 people randomly, what form of government do we have? 9 of them are going to tell you, oh, we have a democracy. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the democracy. No. And to the republic. We say it over and over and over again, and yet 9 out of 10 people will tell you, well, we live in a democracy. So that's just a little example of how complacent you can get, how things can lose their meaning. So this is just a little reminder to kind of, let's get back to our roots. Let's know this document that our country was founded on. Let's get a glimpse of what our government is supposed to look like. And maybe we can find a path back to this. So I thank you all for being here. I would like to go ahead and close in prayer, and then you guys can enjoy the rest of your day. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this awesome opportunity to come together and meet new people and get to know our sheriff candidates some more. And thank you for this wonderful opportunity to get to know our founding fathers' original intention of what they envisioned our country should be, one nation under God. And we just want your help, Lord, to restore that in this nation, Lord. Please just put your favor once again on us. We know that we started as a Christian nation for the purpose of honoring you and advancing the Christian faith, and we had your favor, Lord. We want that favor back. Lord, help us to establish this nation as a Christian nation to honor you and to do your will, Lord. And we just wish safe travels for everyone as they travel home today, and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.